Okay, today we're going to go over the 4.3 notes. So before we start with some problems, we need to talk about some vocabulary. Some of this is a review, but some of these are new terms. So the first vocabulary word is congruent. Congruent we've been using a lot this year, but I felt like it was important to go ahead and just clarify that congruent means that something is the same size and the same shape as something else. It could be an angle, it could be a triangle, it could be any geometric figure. Alright, congruent polygons are when all the parts of one polygon are congruent to the corresponding parts of the other polygon. So that means each side has a matching side on the other one. Each angle has a matching angle. Corresponding parts are just matching parts, which will be easier to figure out what that means when we see it with a picture. So when we go to the next slide and we look at congruence and corresponding parts. Corresponding parts simply mean that if you have angle R and angle A, it has a corresponding angle, meaning that between both triangles there is a pair of angles that are equal. B and S are corresponding. They are another pair of angles that are equal. Angle C and angle T are also corresponding. The sides can also be corresponding. So side BA is corresponding to side SR, okay? And so on with side ST and BC, and then side CA corresponds to side TR. So the first theorem we have today is that the third angles theorem. And what it says is that if you have two angles of one triangle congruent to two angles of the second triangle, then the third angles of the triangles are congruent. So if we know that B is congruent to angle E and angle A is congruent to angle D, then we can conclude that angle C is congruent to angle F. So we could say that angle C is congruent to angle F, and the reason we could give, if we had to state a reason, justify or prove, we could say because of the third angles theorem. Now, just as a side note here, remember that the reason we have one arc and one arc shows that these two are congruent to each other. If they have two arcs, angle A, which has two arcs, is not congruent to angle E because it only has one. So the number of arcs you're putting in do make a difference. They are telling you something specific. Alright, so on this one it says, show that the polygons are congruent by identifying all congruent corresponding parts, and then write a congruent statement. So when we're using triangles, we're going to have three pairs of congruent angles, three pairs of congruent sides, and I will show you how to write a congruent statement. So let's just begin by stating all the angles. So if we look at this triangle, we have that angle A is congruent, and over here on this triangle is congruent to angle J, and we can tell that because it has the one arc. Angle B is congruent to angle K, and angle C is congruent to angle L. Then for sides, we can go over here and we can say side AB is congruent to, and we want to go ahead and put the marking on that. Note that on AB, I went from the angle with one arc to the angle with two arcs. So over here, I specifically want to go JK. Although if I went KJ, technically I'm still talking about the same side. Do you see how if I go AB from one arc to two arcs, then over here I need to go JK from one arc to two arcs. If I had gone BA, I would have done KJ. So let's do another one and see if it makes more sense. If we do this side, let's call this side CB, just to try it differently. So if I do CB, take note I went from three arcs to two arcs. So over here, think in your head for just a second, which order? Should you go KL or LK? Alright, so hopefully you're thinking in your head, three arcs to two arcs, and so you go LK. So consistency does matter on this. You are graded on consistency. So if you have CB, you have to have it in the order LK. If you put BC, you would have to have KL. Now try the one with three hash marks on it. This is side AC. So if I put side AC, keep in mind the order I went in was from one arc on the angle to two arcs. So A corresponds with J, so J needs to go first if A went first. C corresponds with L, so L needs to go next. So I can do AC congruent to JL, or CA congruent to LJ. So now, the congruent statement. This is something that will keep coming up. It's going to be something you need to write, but it's also going to be something you need to be able to use. So congruent statements, the order very much matters. So how we write a congruent statement is we start by writing one of the triangles. So we can sit here and say triangle ABC. So in this case, we just choose 3 angles off the triangle. We write them down in any order. The order matters when you're getting ready to write your second triangle. So if I did A has 1 mark, so I need to do J first because A and J are corresponding. So if A is in the first place over here, J needs to be in the first place. I then did B. B has 2 arcs. So I need to do K because K has 2 arcs. So since B is in the middle, K corresponds to B, so K should also be in the middle. Then I have C with 3 arcs and L with 3 arcs. So L corresponds to C. So this is one correct way to write it. You only need to be able to write it in one correct way, but just for the record, there are multiple correct ways. So let's just pretend that we had started with BCA. If we had done that, that wouldn't have been wrong, but keep in mind that angle B corresponds to angle K. So if B was first, then over here, K would have to be first. Angle C corresponds with angle L, so C is in the middle, L has to be in the middle. And last but not least, A corresponds with J, so if A is at the end, J is at the end. So there is many different examples here. This is just one extra example, but I could come up with multiple other ways to write this, okay? The important part is that the angles that correspond are written together. So if you look at this, in the first place, if A is in the first place, A goes with J, J should be. If A was last, J would have to be last, okay? So over here, same thing. I want you to go ahead and pause the video for a second. Try writing this one on your own, writing out the 3 sets of congruent angles, the 3 sets of congruent sides, and then write out with a congruent statement, keeping in mind that your congruent statement may be different than mine, but there is a way to check for accuracy. So go ahead and pause the video now and try number 2. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and went ahead and tried this. I would start here and I would have that angle A is congruent to angle D. They both have 1 mark. Over here, we can't just say angle B, because angle B could be talking about this angle, it could be talking about this angle, or it could be talking about the whole angle. So don't just say angle B. If I'm referring to this angle right here, I need to call it either angle ABC or angle CBA. I'm going to go ahead and do angle ABC. So it is congruent to this one with the 2 marks, so I need to call that angle DCB. And once again, the order very much matters here. If I did ACB, do you see how I went from the angle with 1 mark, the angle with 3 marks, and then the angle with 2 marks? Oops, I'm sorry. I went from 1 mark to 2 marks to 3 marks. So over here with DCB, I need to go 1 mark to 2 marks to 3 marks. So that's why I have to go DCB. So then, on the one with 3, once again, don't just put angle C. Let's go ahead and put angle ACB. So angle A has 1 mark, C has 3 marks, B has 2 marks, so I'm talking about this angle right here, and it's congruent to this angle right here. So now, do I want to do CBD or DBC? How you know is what you started with was A, so you started with 1 mark. So over here, you have to start with 1 mark. So you go DBC, angle DBC. Now for sides, I'm just going to start with the one with 1 hash mark. So over here, AC has 1 hash mark, and it's congruent to BD. Now we've got to watch our order there, because yes, those sides are congruent, but our order matters. So I went from 1 mark to 3, so I need to call it DB, because I go from 1 to 3. Remember, when you use congruent, you don't use the M for the measure, you use measure of angle if it's equals, and you do use the lines over the line segments. So then let's do the 2 marks. I have AB, and so I went from the angle with 1 arc to the angle with 2 arcs. So I want to specifically go and do DC because I want to go from 1 arc to 2 arcs. So I'm going to do side DC. And then last but not least, I have the one with 3 marks. Now this is where it gets a little bit confusing because the order still matters. So if I start with this triangle, I'm just going to call it BC. It is congruent. Keep in mind, I went from 2 marks right there to 3 marks right there. So over here, I need to label it the angle with 2 marks to the angle with 3 marks. So on this side, I actually need to put side CB, okay? This is the hardest part of this entire lesson is figuring out the order, but the order is extremely important to the rest of our problems. So now I'm gonna go ahead and just write triangle ABC congruent to triangle, and now here's where I have to figure out my order. A goes with D, it's corresponding, it's a matching angle, so D goes first. B's in the middle. B on this triangle corresponds with C. If you think about this triangle on its own, B has 2 arcs in the angle, which means it is matching and congruent to angle C. So I'm going to put C in the middle over here. And then I did C for this triangle, so that is right here. Angle C goes with angle B on this triangle, so B goes at the end. So if you wrote your congruent statement somewhat different, how you check is you make sure that if A is first, D is first. If A is in the middle on your statement, then on the other side, D should also be in the middle. If A was on the end of your first statement, then D would be on the end. Same with over here. If B's in the middle, C's in the middle, okay? So these two are flipped. If you did like A, B, C, and D, B, C, that would actually be wrong and you would lose points for that. All right, here's one more example of doing the same type of thing. I just want to point this out because sometimes the angles aren't marked, and normally we don't just assume things are congruent unless we have a way to prove it. Here we do, because if you think about these being parallel lines, KL and JM are parallel, then that means that these two angles are congruent. Also, if you think about LM and JK being parallel, then these two angles are congruent. The reason why for both of these is they're alternate interior angles. So now, last but not least, we can prove that angle J is congruent to angle L because of the theorem we learned today, which is the third angles theorem. And finally, we could prove that this side was congruent to itself because of the reflexive property. We know that if KM can be congruent to KM, okay? It is the reflexive property. So if you think about this, if it's confusing having too many angles and triangles together, you could always pull them apart right here, and you could think about this as K, J, and M. And then if it was like essentially we took scissors and we cut these two triangles apart, this is what we would have, and this would be K, L, and M. So those are the two triangles we're trying to prove congruent. Notice that essentially what I did was pretended that we were cutting down this line, just so you could see it a little bit better. So on here, the corresponding parts that are congruent, okay, we have, if I start with this angle, the purple one right here, I'm going to do JMK. Angle JMK is congruent to, keep in mind, I went from 3 marks to 1 mark to 2 marks. So I'm going to go 3 marks to 1 mark to 2 marks. LKM. So then, if I do the one with 2 marks, this angle, I'm going to call it JKM. Now the order I went was 3 marks to 2 to 1. So I'm going to go 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to go LMK. And then, because this angle, if I call it angle J, it does not have a way to be divided into any other angles, it's okay to just call this J and say angle J is congruent to angle L. Now keep in mind, when I wrote these, I was real careful to leave the left-hand triangle, all of that on this side, and the right-hand triangle on this side. I didn't mix up and then put angle L congruent to angle J. That'd just be weird. So over here, if I do side JM, congruent to, it has 1 hash mark, so it's congruent to this side. I went from 3 marks to 1, so I need to do LK. Or if I had done MJ, I could do KL. So then on 2 hash marks, that's this side, I'm going to call it KJ. So K has 2 marks, so it corresponds with M. So if K is first, then M is first. J has 3 marks, and L has 3 marks, so if J is second, L is second. Same thing in here, if I have KM, and I'm just going to show you this down here. K has 2 marks, M has 1 mark on this side, but up here, this angle associated with K has 1 mark, and this one has 2. So if I do KM on the left triangle, I went 2 marks to 1 mark. So that means over here on this triangle, I go MK. Then my congruent statement, keeping in mind that there are multiple answers for this, I'm just going to give you one. So if I did triangle KJM, a corresponding angle to K has 2 marks, is M. So I do triangle M. Then I did J, which has 3. L has 3, so if J is in the middle, L is in the middle. And last but not least, I did M. M has 1. On this triangle, K has 1. So if M is at the end, then K is at the end. And that's my congruent statement for that. So I know that was a little bit overwhelming, but I'm really emphasizing it because the order absolutely matters. Being precise on what order you're putting the angles in is very important, okay? If for any reason you need to look for another video, if you're still not clear, you could go to Khan Academy or even to YouTube and type in congruent statements, and you could also see some more examples on congruent statements. Okay, so on this, in the instructions, they will tell us in the book that these two triangles are congruent. So that means that there is a part of this triangle that is congruent to another part. So if I went and I looked at this, the instructions are going to show me which angles are congruent to which. So I actually did not put those in there, but let me go ahead and copy them in really quick for you. So it said that they are congruent, and it wants us to go ahead and write a congruent statement. Just by looking here, I can actually go ahead and tell that A goes with D. So I have A and D. I can also tell by looking that 75 degrees B goes with angle E. It's basically like they took this triangle and they turned it a little bit. So B goes with B. And finally, C goes with F. So first they tell me to find the value of X. So if I look up here, the statement that has X in it is this side. This is side EF. If you think about EF, it's the second letter and the third letter. It goes with BC. So that side goes with this side right here. So I'm going to put down that EF is congruent to BC. Now keep in mind, if they're congruent, then they're also equal, and we know that because we know the congruence rule, that if they're congruent, they are also equal. So instead of EF, I'm going to plug in 2x plus y equals 90.6. Now at this point, I can't continue to solve this one because I can't solve one equation that has two variables. So I'm going to stop and take a look over here at finding y, and if I can find it, I will come back in and I will solve this. So if we look at this one, this goes with angle D. Keep in mind that angle D and angle A are corresponding. They're matching parts. So that means that angle A is congruent to angle D, which we know is their angles are also equal. So 65 degrees equals 2y minus 5. So we set it up like this. We're going to simply add 5 to the other side. We're going to get that 2y equals 65 plus 5 is 70. We divide by 2, and we find out that y equals 35. So from there, I'm just going to come back in, I'm going to plug it in and see if I can finish solving this. So I'm going to substitute, instead of y, I'm going to put 35 equals 90.6. Now to solve this, I subtract 35 from both sides. And so I'm left with 2x equals, and this is one reason it's handy to have a calculator out, right? You should always, always, always be having a calculator out when you're in class or doing homework. So if I subtract 35, I get 55.6. Then I divide by 2, and once again, feel free to use a calculator. Calculators are not bad to use. We divide by 2, and we get 27.8. And so that is our answer. We could check by plugging them back in and making sure they equal 90.6, and by plugging 35 back in and making sure that when you plug it in, 2 times 35 minus 5, you get 65. I wanted to do a second example like this because I wanted to show you that the same rule can apply to any corresponding polygon. It does not just have to be polygons that are triangles. It could be any shape that is corresponding. So over here, we have side DC. We know side DC relates to side RS. If you look, this polygon has been rotated, it's been flipped over as a reflection to be this. So if you look, the wider side is RS, it goes with DC. Then I also know that angle A, right here, if you look at it, it's the one that goes with the smaller side, and so it goes with P over here. So to find angle A, which is x, we have 2x plus 4 equals 100. So we're going to subtract 4. We get 2x equals 96. We divide by 2. And when we divide by 2, just checking on my calculator, I believe we get 48, which is what it came out to be. So on y, we know that 3y minus 3 equals 12. So if you look at it, this is the longer side. It goes with the longer side. They correspond. They match. So we add 3 to the other side. We get 3y equals 15. We divide by 3, and we get 5. And there's our two answers. That will be very similar if you are working on your homework on another day and you come across number 14 or 16. It's very similar to this type of problem. And the triangles are also a different problem in the homework. Okay, I believe this is the last example. So this one is extremely similar to number 28 and 30 on your homework. I actually took this one as 29 out of the book. It says to draw and label a figure to represent the congruent triangles, then find x and y. There's the key here. It does not matter if your triangle is not done to scale. If I make it be a right triangle and it's not a right triangle, it's really not the end of the world. I just want to go ahead and draw two triangles that look fairly the same. Now, I'm going to call one of them triangle LMN. L is corresponding to R, so the angle that looks like L is going to be R. N is in the middle. It corresponds with the letter in the middle here. It corresponds with S. So M is going to go with S. And then N corresponds with T. So N will go with T down here. Now we're going to label everything we know. So L is 49 degrees. M is 10y. Angle S is 70. Angle T is 4x plus 9. So to start with, if we know angle M is 10y, we know angle M is congruent to angle S, the corresponding parts. So M is 10y, S is 70. We divide by 10, and we find out that y is 7. So up here, this is 70 degrees. We can find the third angle right here by knowing that the angles in a triangle add up to 180. So I could have angle N plus 49 plus 70 equals 180. So if I do 49 plus 70, then I come up with 119. So angle N plus 119 equals 180. Now I subtract 119 and I find out that N equals 61 degrees. So if I know that N is 61 degrees, then I know that T is also 61 degrees because angle N is congruent to angle T. So that means the measures are equal. So N is 61, T is 4x plus 9, and then I solve. I add 9 to both sides. I get 70 equals 4x. I divide by 4. And when I take 70 divided by 4, I get 17.5 is what x is. So, x equals 17.5. And I've solved every part of that. I have drawn the figure, I labeled the figure, and I found x and y. Now, our homework we will do in class on Monday. If you would like to start it, I'm not going to give you all of the problems at this point. I don't want you to do all of it, but if you just want to get a start to see that you're understanding the lesson, the first few problems we're going to do, we're going to start with number 10 through 20 even. So if you would like to do that, you can. On number 10 and 12, it is going to ask you to identify all congruent corresponding parts and then write the congruent statement. On number 12, you don't have to do all the parts. I know that that's 3 angles and 3 sides and a congruent statement. So on number 12, you only have to write the congruent statement. Now, you do not have to do this homework. It's just if you want to see that you're understanding from the video, you could go ahead and get started on a few problems. But if you don't start, we'll do it in class on Tuesday. And as long as you are working, then I feel like you will most likely get it done in class. So, if you have questions, please ask me in class. Thank you for taking notes and watching the video. We're going to try this and see if it helps. I hope it does. I'll be interested to hear your feedback. Have a great weekend, guys.